Hello, this is Jonathan with Steel Bear Academy. Today I'm going to be talking about stance. How do you stand while you're shooting? What are some pros and cons of different types of stances, and why would you use one over the other? And this is going to be a pretty beginner video, beginner focused, as most of my trainings are. So how do you stand while you're shooting? Well, standing is really just so that you can have a stable platform from which you can shoot your gun, not lose balance, etc. So there's kind of two main types of stances that we talk about in the shooting world. One is called the Isosceles Stance, which is basically, from the name, we're talking about a isosceles triangle. So an isosceles triangle has equal sides on two sides, and then one side's a different length. And so where that name comes from is, let's imagine that this is my firing line, and I'm going to be firing down that way. An isosceles stance would basically square up to the target, meaning you're going to have your feet perpendicular to the target. And then basically you're just going to bend your knees a little bit, feet shoulder width apart, and you're going to come straight out with your gun and take your shots from there. A slight forward lean, a slight forward weight so that you don't fall back, but slight forward lean just so you can absorb that recoil just a little bit better. That's called the isosceles stance. And it's really good for actually shooting. Jerry Miculek is a world-renowned shooter of all kinds, and that's the kind of stance that he likes to use. He talks about it and he says the reason he likes it is because you can easily shoot and pivot with your torso at different targets. And for him, that's a big deal for him. And the proof is in the pudding. He's really, really good at what he does and won a lot of competitions doing it that way. The other type of stance is called the Weaver stance. So the Weaver stance, not sure all the history behind it, but it comes from a guy named Weaver who kind of used this stance, or at least this stance was named for him. Weaver stance, instead of having yourself perpendicular to the target, you are going to be bladed to the target. Blading means your body is going to be kind of more parallel to the target, if that makes sense. Like if the target's down here, it's making a line toward me, I'm sort of making a line that kind of runs parallel to that target. You can call it different whatever words you want to call it, but basically you're going to be bladed to the target. That's this type of stance. And from there, you're going to have your arm extended out. If you're right-handed, it's going to be the right hand. Your dominant leg is going to be back. So for me, it's the right leg. It's going to be back like this. And as you can see, when I extend my arms out, because I've bladed my body, I have to adjust my left arm to match up with my other hand. So you see this, if I have my arm out here, my left arm has to be slightly bent in order for me to get to that other arm. And so what I'm doing is I'm going to do a little dynamic tension. That's basically where this hand is going to be pushing a little bit this way, and this hand is going to be pulling a little bit that way. Kind of like, you ever see those 80s workout videos? They really love that dynamic tension where they get up against the wall and they push against the wall, creating that dynamic tension. So, kind of blade yourself toward the body, blade yourself to the target, bring your gun out in front of your eyes, pull back a little bit, push forward a little bit, take your shots, bang, bang. And that's the Weaver stance. So what's the problem with using one of those two stances? Well, for me, the problem is that I want the benefits of the isosceles stance in that I think that it produces better effects downrange. I think it's a little bit more intuitive and it's easier to shoot with the isosceles stance, but I want the extra stability that comes with the Weaver stance. In a self-defense encounter, it is very possible that you might get hit by somebody. Like somebody might physically touch you, either shove you over or try to take down your legs or punch you, any of those things. And the isosceles stance it's not very conducive to actually fighting. It's not good for overcoming anybody trying to take you to the ground or shove you or push you over, because it's squared up to the target. So to illustrate that, if I square up to my target and I'm taking my shots, if I get pushed beyond what I can manage with just the wiggle of my hips and legs, if I get pushed on both, let's say one arm, if I get pushed, at some point I don't have enough balance to keep myself upright, and I have to catch myself. So if I push, at some point I have to let this leg come back to catch myself from falling over. So you can imagine that if you were in a defensive situation and you're bringing your gun out, and this is your go-to stance, if you get pushed and you have to catch yourself with, if you're starting to get pushed, you're gonna have to catch yourself. So we can kind of hedge our bets a little bit by adapting more stability into our stance from the get-go. So this is where the hybrid part of it comes in. We're still going to be basically doing the isosceles stance, squaring up to the target, except now we're going to be adding a little bit of that Weaver stance in. We're going to just take one slight step back. Now that might not seem a lot, but now it allows us to more easily shift our weight back and forth and more easily catch ourselves with the other leg. So if I get pushed, once I've reached this point, I have a little bit more spring in my back leg. I can now transition to the other leg, and I can catch myself that way. And for me, the reason I choose this, this hybrid type of stance for myself and for most people, is I want the ability to more easily defend against getting knocked over or catching my balance or having more sure of footing than I would if I had my feet straight across in a line, squared up to the target and on isosceles, a kind of more true isosceles stance. And, that really just comes with what I value. I want that flexibility. I want to be able to have somebody learn just one stance, even if that stance sacrifices a little bit in shootability, but it tremendously increases its value as a defensive stance against getting shoved over, against ground attacks, against takedowns, etc. And for me, that's more important to me than the shooting prowess of that stance. Something you also want to think about is if you're ever recommending a stance to somebody else or a grip, if you're talking about any sort of martial art, any sort of skill, physical skill, whether that's baseball or shooting or wrestling or anything, you want to be mindful that there is kind of what is ideal in terms of like a particular way of doing something. Like, this is probably ideal. However, not everybody can do ideal. So if for some reason you can't do the ideal way, like let's say, for example, you tell somebody, okay, here's the grip that you should use, and I want you to lock out those arms, or kind of have them almost nearly locked out, and I want you to really accentuate pushing this left support hand forward to lock out and control recoil. Well, that's kind of ideal. However, if that hurts somebody, like if that's unpleasant to do, it hurts their hand or it hurts their wrist. I trained a guy once who he had some sort of physical ailment in his hand, and that wasn't something that he could do. Now, as soon as he told me that, I understood why he's not doing it. I was like, okay, so here's what you should do. Here's what you should do. But he's like, well, he doesn't do it. And I said, how come you're not doing that? He says, well, it hurts his hand to do. And I say, okay, well, then I want you to do your best to try to get the effect out of that, but don't feel like you need to stress yourself and hurt yourself to try to do it the ideal way. Do it as close as you can to whatever produces the best results downrange. And that's what we're really striving for, the goal. You don't get any extra points for doing it the perfect way. All that matters when you're shooting in terms of, let's say your score in a competition, or how effective you are at shooting your gun in a self-defense situation, you don't really get any extra points for doing it the perfect way back here at the stance level. You only get better results if you actually hit better with your gun, if that makes sense. And it's kind of like the enemy of good is perfect. Like if you can't do it perfect, then some people might not even attempt it at all. But if you can get something pretty good, even if it's not perfect, meaning I use perfect in this to replace the word ideal. Perfect is as good as you can do, and you always strive to improve. But just be aware that if you're recommending something to somebody else, I'm speaking to you, but I don't really know you specifically, so I'm recommending these things generally. But if you have special conditions that cause you to not be able to do this the way I'm describing, then don't do it. Adapt, do something that helps you to do it more comfortably. And my final thought on that was, if you're somebody who's more experienced and you're trying to help other people to improve their shooting and their comfort and all that, keep in mind, again, there is what is ideal and then there's what they can do. And don't let yourself get so stuck in they have to do it the right way that you neglect to help them do it a good way. So I hope that's been helpful for you, and tell me about your stance. Do you like the hybrid stance? Do you choose to have the strictly isosceles stance? Do you do a weaver stance? And why do you choose that? Have you ever really thought about the way you stand, the way you use your stance? Have you tried other ones and then decided, nah, that's not for me, I'm gonna do this one instead? So let me know in the comments down below. I always enjoy reading them, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.